welcome everyone to PIBO's annual Bird Talk and the 2025 World Migratory Bird Day kickoff event. My name is Suzanne Freeman and I am the Executive Director of Pelee Island Bird Observatory. Every year PIBO hosts a guest birder who is leading the way in ornithology, research, conservation, and/or advocacy. This year, Dr. Dan Mennill joins us from the University of Windsor. Previous guest birders have flown in from Mexico, Ottawa, Australia, and even Saskatchewan. This year, we are pleased to host someone from our own flock. Before I introduce Dan, I just want to talk a little bit about World Migratory Bird Day and why people around the world mark this occasion. World Migratory Bird Day, or WMBD, for people in the know, is an annual global campaign dedicated to raising awareness about the conservation of migratory birds and their habitats. It is celebrated on the second Saturday in May and October for the birds that are coming and going. The main goal is to highlight the threats faced by migratory birds and the need for international cooperation to protect them. And because Windsor is a designated bird-friendly city, we are obliged to mark this occasion. And with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Dan Mennill. Dan is Professor of Ornithology at the University of Windsor. He studies acoustic communications in wild animals, especially the songs of birds. He runs the Mennill Sound Analysis Laboratory, and he and his research team use a field-based approach to study animals in Canada, France, the United States, Mexico, Costa Rica, and Colombia. Dan has helped pioneer many new playback and recording technologies for bioacoustic field studies. He has published more than 180 papers in scientific journals and supervised more than 40 graduate students and postdoctoral researchers. He is a fellow of the American Ornithological Society and a lifetime member of the Society of Canadian Ornithologists and the Animal Behavior Society. Dan lives in Lasalle with his wife, who is an artist and a professor, Stéphanie Doucet, and their 2 children. Won't you please help me welcome Dr. Dan Mennill.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I must be the closest guest you've ever had because I live just down this street. So it's an honor to be able to speak to a group of people from our community, and thank you so much for coming tonight to hear me talk about our pretty cutting edge and very new research on how wild birds learn to sing. Good. Sounds work. That just proved that. So it is springtime. Each night, billions of migratory birds, migratory songbirds, are taking off into the night sky to fly under the cover of darkness, using stellar cues for navigation, making their way northward to get to appropriate breeding habitat. Let me take you to the east coast of Canada, to the shores of New Brunswick, where a Savannah sparrow at dusk is taking off, heading out over the Atlantic Ocean, destined for an island in the middle of the Bay of Fundy. This bird was born last year on this island. He then spent the winter in South Carolina, and now he's winging his way back north towards the island where he was born, ready to sing his breeding song, ready to use that song to hopefully attract a mate and to defend a territory. Now, this particular Savannah sparrow sings a unique song that is unlike any Savannah sparrow song that has ever been heard in Eastern North America before. How do I know so much about his song? Is because I designed his song and composed it on my computer, and then I taught him to sing. So who taught you to speak and say the things that you say in life? We are connected to birds in a way that we don't share with many other animals on Earth. There is a behavior that has only evolved 6 times in the history of evolution. as far as we're aware. It has evolved in the songbirds, the hummingbirds, and the parrots, 3 distinct groups of birds. It has evolved in the whales and the dolphins, the bats, and humans, and only humans within the primates. No other primate exhibits this behavior. These 6 groups of animals evolved the capacity of vocal learning, where young animals learn to produce sounds based on being exposed to those sounds early in their life. Every other animal that you can think of, a dog or a cat, if you remove a cat from its parents the day it's born and it never hears a meow, it will still grow up to meow. And the same for a dog. But that is not true for these 6 groups of vocal learners. And it's a feature that connects us to birds and makes birds a great model system to understand vocal learning. And we've been doing that for decades. Many researchers around the globe using birds as the model system to understand the process of vocal learning. And we know how it works. It begins for all of those vocal learners, including you and me, with a sensory phase, usually early in life, when our brain is ready to receive acoustic signals and commit those signals to memory. Many animals, not humans, but almost all the others, then go through a silent period. In birds, that's the time when they're migrating south in relative silence and then migrating northward again. And then all 6 groups of vocal learners have what's known as the sensory motor phase, but you know it by another name, which is a baby babbling. This is when a young animal produces inaccurate copies of adult sounds that are associated with just juveniles, until one day crystallization occurs, a usually very rapid process associated by the brain fixing a whole lot of memories in place. And at that point, sounds go from sounding childlike to sounding like full, typical adult speech, or in birds, typical adult sounds. Crystallization is usually very rapid. It is usually irreversible, like try to learn a language in adulthood. You can do it, but you're going to do it with an accent, right? That's because post-crystallization, our brains are not well equipped to learn new ways of vocal learning. So that's how vocal learning works. It works the same in humans as in birds. How do we know this to be true? From decades of studies of captive reared animals like the zebra finch. We couldn't ethically raise you in a laboratory and just expose you to particular sounds at the stages of development, but we can do that with birds, and people have, not me. I like being outside with birds, I bet like you do, when we think about International Migratory Bird Day. But through careful studies of captive reared birds, we've developed this model. But does this model hold up when we turn our attention to wild animals? In the wild, things are very different than in a cage. There are all sorts of different environmental factors that influence these animals. There is the addition of migration that changes the way that animals interact with the environment. There's other noise. There's choosy females who may or may not be interested in a sound that a male produces. Does our model of vocal learning work for wild, free-living birds? There are a couple lines of evidence to suggest that it does. The best one, this is all observational evidence, but if we were to travel from British Columbia down through Washington and Oregon to California, and we studied these animals, the white-crowned sparrow, we would find all the animals in one region sound very similar to each other. And then we move to a different region, they're still white-crowned sparrows, but they sound a little bit different. And so on as we travel throughout their range. Well, the same is true in humans, right? This is a vocal dialect. People in Newfoundland sound different from people in Texas, even though we're still speaking the same language. So this can occur when young animals, human or bird, hear sounds where they're born, learn those sounds, and then disperse some short distance, settling near where they're born. That's how you get vocal dialects. So it's certainly consistent with the idea that wild birds learn to sing, but it is observational evidence rather than experimental evidence. So the motivation for the work that I'm going to describe for you tonight was to bring an experimental approach to studying vocal learning in wild animals. And it's really the first time anyone has conducted an experiment to study the process of vocal learning. My motivation was to see whether all of our ideas about how captive animals do this special behavior that mirrors our own vocal learning, does that same thing happen when we turn our attention to wild animals and all of the messy things that happen to a wild, free-living bird. So before I tell you about how I address that objective, I want to introduce you to our sound lab, the Mennill Sound Analysis Lab here at University of Windsor, where our team makes up one of the most active groups on Earth studying the sounds that wild animals produce. This is called the field of bioacoustics, bio, life, acoustics, sound. So we study the sounds of living things. We use that in order to develop a deeper understanding of why animals behave the way that they behave. And along the way, we develop tools that help us to better understand animals' conservation needs and to develop new strategies and technologies for conserving wild, free-living animals, especially birds. The techniques in our lab are all field-based. I believe that the most interesting parts of biology for birds can be obtained by going out and studying them in their natural environment. So every year, in fact our lab's empty right now, everyone's dispersed across Colombia and Costa Rica and eastern Canada right now. We go out into the field to study animals in their natural environment. Our studies begin by capturing birds and giving them individual identities so that when we release them, we can track each individual over the course of their life. We do a lot of radio telemetry, especially with MODIS radio tags, which are these specialized tags that are picked up by towers located all across North and South America. There's one on the roof of our biology building that can be used to detect animals and understand their migration routes. And we use sound playback. This is where we use a loudspeaker to broadcast a song, and a loudspeaker can really accurately simulate the voice of a wild bird, and we can tell how that animal reacts to the broadcast of its sound. We do a lot of recording in my team. This could be focal recording with a parabolic reflector, so I could record you, but I wouldn't get any noise from the people on either side of you, so I get a very directional column of sound. Or we will use automated recorders like this one, which can be set out in the environment and left to record for days or weeks or months at a time. In our studies of whales, we launched underwater microphones called hydrophones into Canada's Pacific and Atlantic waters. And our newest recording technique are these things, which I hope you'll start to see more of. This is a microphone for recording migratory birds. There's a tiny little microphone in there. It can pick up a slice of the night sky and tap into the sounds that birds make as they're migrating to provide a technique that could complement the work done by Pelee Island Bird Observatory or Holiday Beach Migration Observatory without having to capture the birds. Our study systems, the one I'll talk about tonight, is the Savannah Sparrow, a migratory songbird found here in Ojibwe and all across North America. We also have studies of diverse species of migratory warblers. In the Pacific Ocean, we study humpback whales. In the Atlantic, we study beluga whales. And in Costa Rica, we study different species of wrens and a really weird toad where the males change to a yellow color one day of the year and then revert to brown as soon as they've mated. And that's a story for International Toad Day. I don't know if that exists. But tonight, the star of the show is the Savannah Sparrow. A little brown jobby. It's not going to win any prizes for having the best plumage, but it might win a prize for the best song. And here, let me start by playing the song of the Savannah Sparrow for you. So isn't that great? There's a lot going on there. It's high pitched, but there's a lot of complexity in this short little song. Only the male sings, and every male has one song that is unchanged over the course of his entire adult life. What we're looking at here is called a sound spectrogram. It's analogous to a staff of music where time runs along the x-axis and frequency is on the y-axis. So we see those high-pitched introductory notes, middle buzzy sections, and a terminal trill. I'll play it for you again. Try. So that is the Savannah Sparrow, and the studied population of Savannah Sparrows that we work on is located in eastern Canada in the Bay of Fundy, this region surrounded by the south coast of New Brunswick and the west coast of Nova Scotia there. Great place to visit if you're ever out there. Reach out to me. You can come and visit our study island. It's known as Kent Island, where there's a scientific station run by Bowdoin College in the United States, and they're kind enough to let a bunch of Canadians record their Savannah Sparrows out of the island as well. This is a view of the island. It's a grass-like savanna ecosystem. By the way, Savannah sparrows are called Savannah sparrows because the first one was identified near Savannah, Georgia, not because they live in a savanna habitat, but they do live in savanna habitat. The island is surrounded by perfect habitat for Savannah sparrows. It's a tiny little island, 3 kilometers north to south, less than a kilometer east to west. There are 4,000 breeding pairs of herring gull. So anytime you set foot near them, you stir up like a tornado of these giant gulls that squawk and poop all over you. So they're not my favorite birds, but there they are, an important breeding colony. These are eider ducks, the same ducks that we get eider down to make the finest insulating material you could for blankets or for jackets. Eiders would probably be extinct from eastern Canada were it not for the population of eiders on Kent Island, which were protected at the height of eider hunting in the early part of the last century. But they held on there and have now expanded and are now fairly common in eastern Canada. Underground on our island are these amazing birds, barely bigger than a robin, but related to albatrosses. They're little storm petrels that build burrows in the moss on this island. So it's a pretty important island for these breeding seabirds. But the thing that takes me there are these breeding songbirds, where there's a healthy population of many, many hundreds of pairs of Savannah sparrows. When we arrive on the island, and 5 University of Windsor students arrived there last week, we begin by setting up mist nets. These are the same nets that are used at Pelee Island Bird Observatory. They're like a badminton net, 2 thick lines stretched between poles. Here you see one being set up, so it's easier to see because the net's all coiled up. But once it's open, it's very hard to see, so it looks like mist. Birds don't see it, they fly into it and get trapped in a pocket. We quickly get up on them after years of practice and certification. We carefully extract them, making sure that the bird is not injured. And then we do the kinds of things that ornithologists do. We take standard measurements of the animal, we weigh the animal, we kind of have a mobile banding station, a little bit different than a local station might be. We pluck 1 tail feather, which can tell us a lot of interesting things, like how old they are, who's related to whom, even where they winter, in some cases using stable isotopes. And importantly, we give each bird an identity. And we do that through 4 little bracelets we put on every bird, 2 on each leg. One of them, this numbered band, is a Canadian Wildlife Service band that is provided to us by the Canadian Wildlife Service and is different for every bird, but you can't read that number, even with the best binoculars. So what you can do is put 3 colored bands on it. Black will be red, R, O for orange, and that becomes that bird's identity. We would call them bro, B-R-O. We let the bird go, and now all we need to do is hold up our binoculars, see there's black, red, orange, there's bro, and then we come back from the field day and say, oh, I saw bro today. He was foraging down by the southern forest, or whatever the case might be. So that's how we follow the birds. Here's 2 more as examples. This guy's light blue, yellow, red. L-Y-R is the first letter of each of those, so we call him Lear. Here's orange, white, light blue, we can't see on his other leg, he's owl. So this is how we tell each one of the birds in our study population from the next. Standard practice for people running long-term studies of wild birds. The last thing we often do is we attach a modus radio tag to the animals. This is a tiny little backpack. It weighs about 2% of the mass of these birds, so it's not very heavy. It sits around their drumstick legs and sits just above their preen gland, and you can see the long antenna that hangs down behind the bird. It doesn't get in the animal's way, and that allows us to track the animal as it passes by modus stations like the one on the roof of the biology building here on the University of Windsor campus. So we can figure out where did it fly south for the winter, when did it depart, when did it return, and so on and so forth. So this population of Savannah sparrows has been studied for many decades. It's one of the longest running studies of individually banded birds in all of North America. And all of that work has taught us that this is a pretty special population. In particular, this population has very high natal site philopatry, which is a super nerdy way of saying that birds who are born on this island tend to come back and breed there as adults. Philopatry, meaning that they return to the same place over and over again. Most of the adults that breed in this population were born in this population. That fact wouldn't be true around here. If we went out and banded all the sparrows in this park, and tried to find them next year, none of them would be here. Most animals disperse away from where they're born. But on this island, and maybe because it's an island, they return there to breed year after year. And that presents an exciting opportunity if you're interested in vocal learning, because you could record the early environment of those birds, maybe even manipulate that early environment, and have a reasonable chance that those birds will come back after migration, singing their adult song to tell you what kind of stuff that they learned. Their annual cycle is like a typical migratory bird. Birds hatch on our island in mid-June. The young stay on the island till mid-September. Then they migrate south. Our birds overwinter. We know from our MODIS data in the southeastern United States, especially South and North Carolina, over to the Florida Panhandle and parts of Georgia. Males arrive first, females a few weeks later. Right around now, our first female is likely to arrive on the island tomorrow morning or the next morning. They mate, and the process begins anew. They live 2 or 3 years, and if they're lucky, will breed successfully 2 or 3 times on average. That's their annual cycle. Song is produced only when they're on the breeding grounds. They do not sing when they're in little flocks of Savannah sparrows on the wintering grounds. So, the title of my talk is How Wild Birds Learn to Sing, but sometime between when I emailed that to Marilyn, it got changed to Why Wild Birds Sing. Maybe it was a game of telephone. And then I saw the poster up, and I didn't want to make anyone fix posters, so I thought, well, I'll just tell you why wild birds sing along the way to talking about how wild birds learn to sing. Because we know why wild birds sing. If you take a loudspeaker and play Savannah Sparrow song through it, the resident bird is going to show up acting really aggressive. I don't know if that seems aggressive to you, but it does to another Savannah Sparrow, making himself look big and imposing. That's kind of a threatening display for many animals. We know that songs are really important in territory defense, and that is the first reason Savannah sparrows sing, and that every songbird sings. They sing as a territorial proclamation that I'm here, this is my identity, this is my territory, hey other males competing for resources, stay away. So it sounds like pretty music when it wakes us up in the morning, right? But it's actually like audio warfare that these animals are using to defend their territories. Now, at the same time that that song keeps other males at bay, it attracts females, and that's the second function and the second reason why wild birds sing, is to attract mates. So here you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 eggs of a Savannah sparrow nest. They're buried in habitat like we see just out that window. Really hard to find. You can know they're within a meter, and still it takes forever to find them. I'm not good at it, but my graduate students are. Sarah Dobney is a PhD student on our team who's testing whether the number of eggs laid by a female and the timing of those eggs relates to male song, and she's found that it does. Females mated to males with longer songs, with more notes, who sing at a higher rate, lay more eggs, and they do so earlier. So females are attracted to breed with males singing really elaborate songs, and that's function 2 of birds. And that's the best I can do in 2 slides to tell you why birds sing. They sing for 2 reasons: to defend their territory against other males and to attract females. So now that we know a bit about Savannah sparrows and the background to our lab and why they sing, we can get to this objective. The inspiration of our research over the last decade has been to use an experimental approach to study song learning in this amazing population of Savannah sparrows. A decade ago, I had this idea that we would use loudspeakers that would simulate tutors for the young birds on the island, broadcasting Savannah sparrow songs to see if young birds might learn from the simulated tutors and thereby study the process of vocal learning in the wild. There was no precedent for it, and there certainly wasn't a very good loudspeaker for it, so I worked with some electronics people in the United States to design special loudspeakers with 4 features. They were weatherproof. They were in little Pelican cases, so we could leave them out for 3 or 4 months a year, year after year after year. They were programmable, so I could use my computer to program them to produce specific songs at specific times of day to produce a realistic sounding tutor. They were light activated, just like a real bird. When the sun came up, they would turn on, and when the sun went down, they would turn off. And finally, they were solar powered. There's no electricity on this island, so it's just a little solar panel at the base of the speaker that keeps them running for months at a time. My idea was that those could be tutors that allow us to test whether animals will learn songs they heard early in their life. And so out of those tutor speakers, I broadcast Savannah Sparrow songs like these 10 songs. I'll play you the one in the top left. Could you tell any difference between that one and the first ones I played for you? I can't. They sound very similar. Maybe some of my students could. But these songs are special. I composed these songs introducing unique elements into them, like this U-shaped introductory note, or these lightning bolt-shaped introductory notes, or this unusual terminal syllable. Each one of the tutor songs contained an element of a Savannah sparrow that was recorded by other recordists in Western North America, British Columbia, Washington State, and so on. 3,000 kilometers from where our study population is in Eastern Canada, and little notes like that that are unlike anything that has been ever uttered in Eastern Canada, and certainly not in our study population in decades of recording. So those notes are like an acoustic fingerprint. If a young animal was to learn from one of our speakers, we would be able to trace it back to one of our tutors using those distinctive acoustic features. So looking at their annual cycle, we started blasting these songs at animals at a typical high Savannah sparrow rate from the day they hatched until they left for migration. Every day, they were hearing these tutor songs from 40 different speakers in their habitat around the island. Then I raced back to Windsor, taught a bunch of undergraduate and graduate classes, served on committees, did all of that stuff, then raced back there to continue the playback, trying to arrive by April 15th of each year. To continue the playback, we would usually succeed at beating the males there by a day or two. We could track them as they made their way up with those modis tags. And then we would continue the playback until such time as all the males had arrived, filled in the territories, and started to attract mates. So it's kind of like a 9-month-long experiment. Although we didn't play songs to them when they're in the winter, we don't know exactly which farm they're at in the winter. Besides, it's not typical for this species to sing in the winter. Then all we had to do is chase every male on the island around with a directional microphone or with an automatic recorder in the gull-rich areas. If you go into the gull-rich areas with a parabola, the gulls just fly around you and the Savannah sparrows hide, because a gull will eat a Savannah sparrow if it can. So you would set one of these up, walk away, the gulls come down, and then you get nice recordings of all the Savannah sparrows. So we would do that for every single animal on the island, asking whether each male is singing a song that's like the songs of Kent Island Savannah sparrows, the typical sounds produced there, or might they have those distinctive acoustic features of our experimentally created tutors. So to put this in scientific terms, where we would address things as a hypothesis just being like an explanation for how things work in the wild, really what we're doing with this experiment is testing the hypothesis that wild animals learn songs by listening to conspecific, their same species, tutors around them. This is an idea that has been suggested to be true for decades, and it is true in the lab, but does it hold up in the wild? It was kind of a nerve-wracking hypothesis to test, because it took me like 2 years to design the sounds and to design the speakers and hone the experiment with my colleagues and collaborators, and then play it back for a year and then stand there waiting with our microphones to see what song they sing. And of course, if they didn't learn our song, there wouldn't be much to tell you, would there? And it would be later, a colleague wrote about the paper we published, said, if you asked me ahead of time, I would have predicted that Mennill was poised to fail, because he was thinking that there are no live animals to tutor from. These are just sort of ghost-like sounds emanating from the speakers. Nevertheless, the day that this bird, light blue, black, light blue, LBL, we call him Lil Bill, LBL showed up on the island singing this song was one of the most exciting days in my working life as an ornithologist. Lil Bill showed up singing this. This is a perfect match to one of the stimuli I created, stimulus 7. So I've used little colored bars to underscore the unique elements of the song I created at the top. And you can see for each one of those, Lil Bill picked it up almost exactly. This bird is singing a song unlike any song ever heard on the island before, but a perfect match to one of our stimuli. He had learned from the simulated vocal tutor. And the excitement didn't end. A few days later, Yellow, Yellow, Light Blue shows up singing this. A great match to stimulus 10. So the colored bars underscore different elements than stimulus 7, but you can see once again, yellow, yellow, light blue has picked those elements up. How many more of these can you stand? Here's another one, navy, light blue, black, sang this song. A great match to stimulus 9. He kind of sassed one note, actually, but it's much closer to this stimulus than it is to any other song on the island that's naturally occurring. And many of these note shapes do not occur outside of the context of our loudspeakers. So over 5 cycles of this experiment, we had 30 birds, 30 young males like this, who learned songs that matched the stimuli, providing us with clear support for the vocal learning hypothesis. Just as we would expect out of laboratory-reared animals, these birds are listening to sounds heard early in their life, incorporating those songs into their repertoire, and then singing them for the rest of their life. We can keep all the textbooks that are based on laboratory studies. This idea holds up into the wild, but there's something quite satisfying to the scientific process in this way of testing an idea in a new environment, using an experiment, and finding it to be true. And that was the heart of our study on vocal learning. A couple of cool side notes. There were 4 more birds beyond those 30 who learned the songs I created, but they learned them long after we stopped playing the songs. Here's an example. Stimulus 1 had this blue unusual section at the end. It was learned by a first generation bird, and then we stopped playing Stimulus 1. We never played it again. 2 years later, a second generation of bird picked it up from generation 1. So this is a song we introduced into the wild and now is being passed on from one generation of bird to the next. We've had 4 cases like this, and I keep checking my email to see if the team on Kent Island might find us a 3rd generation bird this year during our studies on Kent Island. That'll be part of our ongoing studies as we study how culture changes over time in a vocally learning animal. 4 different birds did something pretty weird. Here's a bird, blue, orange, green, bog. Those are the color bands on his leg. He sang a great match. There's stimulus 37. He could sing it perfectly. He could also sing a typical Kent Island song perfectly. And for the first 2 weeks after he showed up from his first northward migration, he sang both. And then he threw our song away and only sang the Kent Island typical song for the rest of his life. It's a behavior we'd never observed before of singing multiple songs, because this is a species where every male only sings one, and we had it happen 4 times with 4 different stimuli, leading us to an exciting area of research that I'll describe briefly in a minute. But it has meant that this experimental simulation allowed us to find out new things about the way birds sing. Now you may be thinking, okay, Mennill, what'd you do to these birds? They're singing these pretty weird songs. Well, we were nervous about that, so the first year and every year since, we've compared how did the birds fare when we taught them unusual songs. All of the birds, all 34 of them, that learned experimental songs successfully defended a territory. All of them attracted a mate, not sooner or later than typical birds. Here's their pattern of longevity for a bird that learned an experimental song versus a bird that learned a typical song. It's identical. We can't find any feature that's different for these birds. So I think we taught these birds, in human terms, to sing with an atypical accent, but they're still capable of engaging in meaningful conversations with the other birds around them. So this behavior of these animals during the sensory motor phase, right before they crystallize their final adult song, of singing multiple songs and throwing one away, was really interesting to me, and I'd like to finish my talk by talking about what that phase has taught us and how we use this experimental protocol to test some new ideas. And in particular, I was excited by the idea that the sounds you hear after your first northward migration, when you're coming to a place like this, or Kent Island as a young breeding male for the very first time, the sounds you hear when you get to the site where you're going to breed are probably really important. The sounds you're hearing other males produce around you are the sounds that you've got to compete with to try and attract the attention of females. And those are the sounds that establish territorial boundaries. So it's like that's the currency of your negotiations with other animals around you. And I had the idea that they might be singing multiple songs and then throwing one away based on whether they're re-exposed to those songs at the onset of that first breeding opportunity. And so I created a hypothesis that I'm calling the re-exposure hypothesis, which is the idea that animals might learn songs that are heard early in their life, and then again, right at the start of their first breeding season. To put it in human terms, imagine you were lucky enough to grow up in a household where you learned English and French and Spanish. And then you go out into the world, you go to the University of Windsor, get a great education, and then you go out into the world and make your way, and you find yourself in an area where everyone speaks French. That is probably the language you'll commit to and speak for the rest of your life. I think that idea that your early adulthood acoustic environment might shape your process of learning is what I'm trying to get at here with this idea of the re-exposure hypothesis. And I realized we could test this. So in 3 additional years of this experiment, we produced sounds at different times of the year. We took a third of our songs and broadcast them only from the time the young hatched until they left for migration, only the first 3 months of their life, in their natal summer. And then we never played those songs again. Another third of the songs we only played in the spring. They'd been born the previous summer, they hadn't heard these, they'd been all south. Then they come back and we played those songs only at the onset of their first breeding period. And the final category were sounds that we played at both time periods, both in their natal summer and upon their return to their first breeding season. And if this idea of re-exposure is important, which category of songs do we expect them to learn? It would be these ones that they're exposed to early and then again. And I'll cut right to the chase. That is just what we found. Here we've got the proportion of birds in this part of the study that learn songs that were heard in both summer and spring. 90% of the animals learn songs heard in both of those time periods. All else being equal, they're going to learn songs and keep them for the rest of their life if they heard them in their natal summer and their first breeding spring. No bird ever learned a song that was only heard in their first breeding spring. They have to hear it when they're young. I didn't hear French growing up, and I'm trying to learn French at the same time my kids are learning French, and they're great at it because they're hearing it in their youth, and I'm only hearing it in adulthood. This again speaks to the parallels between humans and birds. The things we hear when we're young prime our brains to retain things later, but you have to hear it in your youth. I guess that's a difference. I can learn French, just not well. These birds can't learn them if they only heard it in the natal spring. And the 2 birds is something kind of interesting. They heard it in their youth, but then not in their first breeding period, but they still learned the song. So you don't have to hear it again, but clearly it leads to more learning if you do hear it again. And it draws our attention to this time of year that most ornithologists have ignored. It offers support for this idea that what you're re-exposed to informs your pattern of vocal learning. And to better understand it, we took birds. Here's Silver, Silver Green. He sang 2 songs and he threw one away. He kept the top song. Song 1 was the song that he kept, and he sang that song. I think he lived 4 or 5 years and sang that song every year, never singing song 2 again. Why did he choose that particular one? Well, to answer that question, a great master student named Ian Thomas in our team compared Silver, Silver Green to all of his neighbors. Every bird occupies a territory. He's got one to the north, east, west, and south. And so we recorded all their songs, and we used a bioacoustic technique to compare song 1 to each of his neighbors' songs. A low number here means a really similar song. I think you can see that Silver, Silver Green song 1 and Bog in the top left. Those are pretty similar looking songs. So it has a low score. GOY has a much higher and a different kind of song. We did the same for his song 2, calculating a bioacoustic similarity score. And the song he retained was the song with the best match to a neighbor. We replicated this across 21 different birds. In every single case, they kept one of 2 songs that was the closest match to the animals around them. So it's like they've learned multiple languages. They're showing up following their first migration. They're hearing what's common. That's the song that I'm going to sing, one that shows the best match to animals around me. Birds retain songs that are most similar to their neighbors. Now, is there an advantage in doing so? Indeed there is. Here's a plot of a whole bunch of birds that Ian and I studied, and our x-axis is males who are singing songs that are really similar to their neighbors versus males that are really different from their neighbors. And our y-axis is a measure, I should just relabel that axis fights. The top is birds that got in a lot of territorial battles over the first 2 weeks upon arrival, and the bottom are animals that didn't get in many territorial battles. And you can see there's a strong relationship here. Animals that sing songs similar to their neighbors get in fewer, potentially costly, territorial battles with other males around them. Males who sing different songs end up getting in much more physical, aggressive interactions with males around them. So by listening to the other animals and choosing the song that matches, they end up with the advantage of not having to have as many aggressive physical encounters. Finally, this turns into an effect at the level of the entire population. Here's our study site. It's 3 islands at high tide is 1 island at low tide. Each one of these dots is in the meadows and the savannas of Kent Island. They're about 50 meters apart, and every year I visit every one of those points and record so that we can sample every single male on the island every single year. And then I bring the recordings back to campus. A team of undergraduate students help me count which birds are present, and then each symbol here is a different animal, color-coded by which of the typical island songs they sing. The little white dots, by the way, are the birds who learned our experimental songs. There's not as many of them as there are animals singing the typical songs. It's kind of a lot to take in, so let's hone in on that topmost island, Hay Island. Here, each symbol represents a bird. The dotted line represents his breeding territory's boundaries, and there are 4 different song types of the animals on the island in this year. And what you can see is we end up with pockets of similar sounding animals. 2 males singing the blue song type, a pocket of animals singing the purple song type, a big pocket of males singing the yellow song type. This behavior of listening to the animals around you, remembering the multiple sounds memorized in youth, and choosing the one that matches your neighbors gives rise to the phenomenon of dialects, where animals are found in pockets of similar sounding animals. So it gives them the advantage of not having to fight as often, and it means there's this interesting effect at the population scale of animals living in groups with similar sounds to their songs. So with that, I'd like to summarize what I have told you about our research into Savannah sparrows today. Firstly, using an innovative experiment using loudspeakers to simulate tutors, we found the first ever evidence that wild birds learn songs from vocal tutors by using an experiment. And it confirms long-held ideas, but it shows that they hold up under the scrutiny of an experiment in a wild, free-living animal. We showed that birds learn songs that they hear early in their life, but they preferentially learn songs that they hear again later after they've engaged in their first southward and northward migration. If they encounter it again, they're especially likely to learn that sound. In doing so, by retaining songs that match the animals around them, birds end up experiencing less aggression. They're fitting in acoustically to their environment, and that comes with a direct advantage to them. And this behavior gives rise to a geographical phenomenon of animals who live together in pockets of similar sounding individuals, also known as dialects. And as I conclude, I need to thank the Natural Science and Engineering Research Council and the Canada Foundation for Innovation, who funds our work, our partners at Birds Canada and the MODIS network that brings a lot of people together who study bird migration through MODIS. My collaborators are Stéphanie Doucet, Ryan Norris, Amy Newman, and Heather Williams, and many student collaborators, logistical supporters, and field assistants. The Mennill Sound Lab on campus, where students have spent so many hours helping us scour through our recordings from Kent Island, and I'm deeply grateful for all of their support. I'm thankful to Pelee Island Bird Observatory for inviting me to deliver this talk tonight on how wild birds learn to sing, the dynamics of vocal learning in nature. Thank you. Well, am I allowed to take any questions, Suzanne?
Of course.
Okay. Phew.
Question. When you have neighboring birds that are singing a similar song, is there any interference in their breeding territory from the neighbor?
I don't have a good answer to that question, Bob. It's really interesting. It reminds me of a study of swamp sparrows that showed males who sing similar songs sometimes form alliances that they used in order to repel other different sounding animals. We've never found evidence like that in Savannah sparrows. So far, the only effect we've found is that by matching your neighbor, you experience less aggression. They still have a little bit when they're settling. So I don't know about any deeper consequences to it. It's a good question. We'll keep looking.
Do you have any guesses to how the songs that you've introduced to the island might evolve over time?
This is a great question. How will those songs change? So far, it seems like they are not persisting over long periods of time, but instead notes are coming out of the songs I composed and being incorporated into typical songs. So I don't know whether, I think maybe we need to think about their songs as being a little bit more like a sentence than like a word. And so they're taking little syllables out of a long sentence and then shuffling them a little bit. But this is very much an area that we're working on. This experiment recently concluded, and now we're trying to find are there third and fourth generation birds. I think we have some third gen birds, but they're not singing the exact same song that I composed. Instead, they're taking elements from it and shuffling it. And really, that's kind of the whole excitement around birdsong and around human vocal learning. Every one of us sounds different. Your friend can shout hello and you know who it is right away. That's typical of a vocal learner. It's because there are differences from each generation to the next that each individual can sound distinct, and each individual can have innovations. And so they're copying elements, but sort of reshuffling them a little bit. And I think as we continue to study this population, we'll gain more insight into how culture is changing over time and whether these new notes disappear within a few generations or might they continue on and be recombined in new ways. Good question.
I just have a question. So does the Savannah sparrow here then, like, you know, it sounds a lot different than the one on Kent Island?
We do have Savannah sparrows right between here and I think you live in Lasalle too. Yeah. I think that I could tell the difference between a local Savannah sparrow and one out there, but then we would get to somewhere near Quebec if we were driving out and the line would start to get blurred for me. So there's a little bit of a gradation. And the phenomenon I described with these pockets of similar sounding animals is pretty subtle stuff. I can't always hear those differences, but as soon as we get the sounds back to the lab and we analyze them, that's where we clearly see those differences. These animals are singing so fast and with so much complexity, our ears aren't well attuned to hear it. So when we look at it as a spectrogram, the distinction is clear. And if we dial up a Lasalle Savannah sparrow and a New Brunswick Savannah sparrow, you would say, whoa, those are as different as my artificially created tutor songs. But to the birds, I mean, it is all still Savannah sparrows too, you know?
What's the expected life expectancy on this Savannah sparrow?
Our males live about 2.7 years and females about 2.4 on average. And our longest lived male, I think, is 7 years. I need to consult with my collaborator Ryan Norris at the University of Guelph to be certain on that. But those are pretty good estimates, I think, Bob. Yeah, they don't live a long time. They live fast, they have a lot of kids, and learn good songs. Off they go. Well, before I wrap, I'd like to point out that at the invitation of Pelee Island Bird Observatory, I wrote a book, a chapbook, which is a short book, hand-published, being held up by Grant, his publishing agency. Do you want to speak to it, Grant?
I'm with Woodbury Farm Books. We partnered with PIBO to publish essays by guest birders that PIBO brings. These chapbooks are for sale here, and the proceeds go back to PIBO to help them continue the good work we're doing on Pelee Island.
Thank you, and thank you for the beautiful hand-bound chapbooks that you've created. I feel quite proud of the one that you created, and it's got an original piece of art of a Savannah sparrow on the cover by Julie
Hall. She's a local artist. So
amazing.
If you're looking for a made in Canada item, this was hand-bound by a local publisher.
true. Yeah, if anyone wants a signature, I'd be happy to give one. And as Grant said, all of the proceeds go to support Pelee Island Bird Observatory. Maybe you're going to speak to that, Suzanne, I don't know, but I value the work that bird banding stations do so highly. We wouldn't understand everything that we know about bird migration if it weren't for the thousands and thousands of hours of bird banders spent monitoring mist nets, banding birds, developing the expertise to understand birds. And so this is really important ornithological science and community science and local science that connects us to animals of great conservation importance. So all of the proceeds from the book go to, in part, go to support Pelee Island Bird Observatory. Which maybe is what you were going to say, and I should stop talking.
That's okay. Are there any further questions before we thank Dan for his presentation? No? Well, thank you so much, Dan. It was,